All right, it looks like we're still a little shy of quorum at the moment. Just double checking, mic check.
Check, check.
Yeah.
Gotcha, Tom. Angela, thank you.
And looks like we have a quorum established now. And then I think Roger's traveling today, and so we would need to appoint a chair pro tem for today's meeting.
Well, Todd always does such a fine job.
You beat me to it. I was going to nominate Dan.
Oh,
Well, then if I have a decision, I say Todd.
Okay.
That
Welcome,
doesn't matter to me
everyone.
either way.
This is Washington State Building Code Council for October 10th.
This is the BFRW committee.
BFRW. Thank you.
change hats.
Change hats. Okay. Let's take roll, please.
Roger Haringa. I don't see in the room. Todd Byrether.
Here.
Dan Young.
Here.
Angela Haupt.
Here.
Katie Sheehan.
Here.
Tom Handy.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay. Would anyone from the public like to be recognized? Well, Ken first.
Well, with your great introduction, I don't know how well this meeting is going to go today. Ken Brulette, City of Seattle Fire Department.
Welcome, Ken. Patrick.
Yes, thank you. This is Patrick Hanks with the Building Industry Association of Washington.
Good morning, Patrick. Okay, see no others. We will go on to number 2. Give a motion to approve the agenda.
Move to approve as presented.
Second.
Second.
Okay, we'll go with Tom and then I think Dan. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The agenda is approved. We do have minutes.
Yes, sir.
Number 12. As we're scrolling, could we hear a motion to approve the September 12th minutes?
Motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting, September 12th.
Second.
Thank you, Dan and Tom. Any edits? Okay, if none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? The minutes are approved. Okay, so leading into that, we're on to the
Main body of our work today, which is hearing a rulemaking request we received from Ken Brulette. There's a new provision in our statute 1927.600 resulted out of the 2024 legislative session. Give me 2 seconds. I'm going to pull it over here so we can see it. This is relative to how areas for childcare centers are calculated in existing buildings. And during the legislative session, as we reviewed this, we had the take on this that it wouldn't require rulemaking on SBCC. And Ken is here today to tell us that there's some confusion resulting from this being in our statute. And we should do some rulemaking to make sure that the confusion is reduced. But I don't have a language proposal. I just have a petition to explore it. And Ken, I know you're online. If you want to maybe take a little bit of the reins here and talk about the confusions you guys are encountering, we
Sure.
can make some plans.
Sure. One of the issues is in chapter 9 of the building code and fire code under sprinklers. It all talks about fire area. Fire area is used, and that fire area is normally bounded by fire barriers, which are rated walls. And when we understand that the goal of this was to try to reduce sprinkler requirements and fire alarm requirements for childcare facilities. But what it appears is that what is happening is that they're thinking that you can just move into an existing building. I'll give you an example of just a strip mall, and you're going to take over one of the spaces, and that you would be able to occupy that space, have your occupant load calculated um, for that space, but you would not have to provide a fire barrier separation between the two different uses in that building. And I don't think that was the intention of this. I think that the fire area or fire areas were still something that was going to be bounded with fire barriers. We were struggling with this in Seattle. We had a 2-story existing building that daycare proposed to come in, and you have daycare on one level and a different use on a different level. And we were trying to figure out how we were going to allow it without separating those uses out. So we're just looking at either, we're struggling asking this, if the State Building Code Council thought at one point that there was no reason to do rulemaking, then maybe an interpretation of how to apply fire areas to this, because we're just struggling. We understand that they want us to use the occupant load factor of 35, but does that apply to E3 childcare along with I4 childcare? And the difference there again was with our age of our children, less than 2.5 for an I4, older than 2.5 for an E3. So just looking at, if you guys don't think rulemaking is, then we'll just continue to struggle. But we're just wondering if you guys believe that maybe it should be given a second look. And just wonder if any other jurisdiction are having any issues with it, because we obviously are.
Thank you, Ken. Angela.
So I guess I'm a bit confused as to why this would ever affect separation requirements. The separation requirements are based on occupancy classifications and what's beside each other and whether it's sprinklered or not. And, it's chapter 5, mixed occupancies. And so this, it specifically says you calculate the occupant load. I honestly don't know why this was necessary either, because isn't that how you do it? Is each space you do the occupant load based on the occupancy classification of that area, or you can do it as a whole on a conservative level.
Yeah, you are correct, but let's say we have a mixed use, non-separated, but the chapter 9 requirements for sprinklers based on occupant load is based on fire area. The fire area needs to be bound by exterior walls or fire barriers. And when I have a mixed use, non-separated, I then have to look at the entire building as my fire area, which would then put my occupant load generally over that count that would require sprinklers for an E-occupancy, if it was an E-occupancy.
So I guess, so how is this any different than any other mixed occupancy if any other, like a school, tries to go in to that same space? Wouldn't you count it as you'd do the occupant load for that space as an E, and then you would use the fire area just as is?
I don't yeah, the fire area, again, you have two different requirements, with occupancy requirements and fire area requirements. And I think that the intention of this RCW was to remove the fire barrier requirement when we're creating fire areas, because I don't think they're intending to move into these buildings and not have to put in a fire barrier.
Oh, and that may be the intent, but that is not what this did, in my opinion, with the language. Again, we looked at this for rulemaking, and I don't know what rulemaking would be, in my opinion. I don't know what rulemaking would be appropriate, because it would be us kind of saying somewhere in here, it would be something for for new child care centers. It would be like in the existing building code,
So
going
let me just,
into an existing building.
okay, so let me just ask you this. When you're determining occupant load for a fire area,
Yep,
so I have two uses. I have my B use
Yep.
and my E use.
Yep.
Are you adding the occupant load together
yeah,
to come up with the requirement for sprinklers? If I had an E, the sprinkler threshold, let's say, is going to be 51. All right.
yeah,
And
if
then
they're not separated, yeah.
if they're not separated. Okay.
Mhm.
So that's the issue, is that I think that they were trying to carve out these without that separation. And that was the intention of this, is so I don't include the other occupant load without a fire barrier. Because that was, they would just wanted to be able to move into an existing building, use a space, say, this is my daycare, and you're only going to use that occupant load in that space to determine my sprinkler requirement. You are not going to go outside of my space and include that occupant load too. You're only going to include that occupant load in that daycare area. And I think
Yeah.
that's the interpretation then that we need from the Building Code Council, that
Mhm.
says, nope, you are going to include that occupant
Yes.
load outside without
Mhm.
fire barriers.
And that's where I think you, as an official from the city of Seattle, I think that would be the appropriate approach, is to request an official interpretation. For that would be my choice for a direction for us to give the opinion that this does not affect the calculation of fire areas or anything, because unfortunately that may have been their intent, is to make it super easy that they can slip right in here, safety, throw it to the wind, whatever. But unfortunately, this is another one of those cases where that's not what they did. I mean, they said calculate the occupant load based only on the area used for childcare. They didn't say for the purposes of sprinklers. They didn't say for the purposes of occupancy separations. Yep. They just said occupant load. And for the most part, that would be, okay, that's gonna affect the egress from that space,
Yep.
know?
And no, and I agree. And so Ardell and I talked about this, and she was talking about
Yeah.
going through the interpretation route. But how you just describe it was the rulemaking that would be nice to have in Chapter 9. So it's in the body of our code, because since the state of Washington is more restrictive than the national code with these type of occupancies, I think would be best if it was part of that rulemaking process, since we already are more restrictive, so we could clarify that for determining fire areas for these type of occupancies, you only include it or you don't include it. And I just think it would be clear if it was in rulemaking versus an
Right.
interpretation. Just again,
interpretation's not law. Yeah,
Yep.
we
Yeah.
we do know that. I guess though, my question then is that, again, thanks to legislators, our hands are tied as to whether we can do rulemaking unless it's considered an emergency. Correct, Todd?
That's correct.
Or Dustin. So we would have to deem that this is an emergency that we do this. And again, I would say, again, my choice would be to go with the interpretation route for right now, but I would say if you really, if you can come up with language for chapter 9
Hmm.
that kind of makes sense and present that, then I think I could wrap my head around it a little better. Because right now, personally, as a building official, I read that and I wouldn't even go anywhere near it having anything to do with sprinklers or separations. I look at that and I'm like, that does nothing, because that's already how we calculate occupant loads. And so if you need something that is more clear in chapter 9, and you said you have some language or an idea, I would like to see that on how to do that.
Okay, but what I'm hearing is that this group doesn't think it would be an emergency.
I think, no, I spoke.
Okay.
No one else has voiced
Okay.
an opinion yet.
So I don't want to,
me, and
yeah,
I am not God.
yeah, I don't want to go through the effort of developing something
Mhm.
for the WAC if it's not deemed, you know, an emergency. So it would be nice to hear from the other people on the group if they think this is important enough to put language in a WAC or not, so other jurisdictions have when they come across this, they're able to deal with it. Seattle, we're unique. We can, I mean, I can just go modify my state or my city fire and building code and present it to council and move on. I don't have to declare it an emergency. We can just do that.
And I think we probably jumped to an emergency pathway before we talked about other legislative path. So Dustin, is that what you're going to talk about? That
Well, what I
It's
wanted
changing law.
to characterize is kind of how I've been handling this petition. So we have a petition that Ken sent over. It's on the Office of Financial Management form, and those petitions we treat through the process for the emergency rules. That's typically how they're handled by the council. This one didn't come with any rule language, but the way I'm running with this one is that this is a chance for the committee to review the petition before it gets introduced at the council meeting next week. And then we have the opportunity for another BFRW committee before the council meeting in November, where they would take action on a petition and make findings for emergency rule if that's what we need to go. If we decided here today that in Ken, you're agreeable to it, that the interpretation is what best serves, we could halt that process and go that route in November. But if you want this to go before the council for considering rulemaking, I'd like to consider it for emergency rule. And then if we deny the petition, we'll talk about alternatives if we get that far.
So, but just to clarify, why can't we go an off cycle if the state law changed? It's not a mandate. It's not a legislative mandate, but there is a provision where if a state law changed, we have the opportunity to line off cycle, right?
I mean, yes, we can do that if the legislature, the actions the legislature warrants that. And I think that Ken's making that case that, there's some confusion resulting from this RCW that could be cleaned up. So we do have that option available to us. But I've been handling this kind of in the emergency rule vein, and we can pivot if we choose.
And just realized when I was filling out that form, for whatever reason, I typed a whole bunch more in that one section. And I don't know if the document just didn't include it. I'm not too sure what happens with those fillable documents.
Okay. Well, let's maybe circle back and we can pull up RCW 1927-032 and just kind of talk through that. But Dan, why don't you comment first, please?
Yeah, I'm just reading this. I agree with Angela that, it just says the building official must calculate the occupancy load based on the area, and that's what we usually do. It doesn't say anything about the rest. And if it's unseparated, I would be inclined, just like Angela, I'm going to include the whole building the way it's written, but I understand the intent of it. But the intent doesn't say that we're waiving the rest of the code, such as separation requirements, for me, it's one of those, you read the words and it just says must calculate the occupancy load of the child care center based on the areas of the building where the child care services are provided. That's it. That's what we do. That's what we've always done. But when you read the intent, and it talks about it, but there's so many sections of code that would have to be changed, in my opinion, such as you don't have to have the area of separation and that kind of stuff. So I think we need to come up with something. Yes. We'll have to decide, I guess, with a vote if it's an emergency or not. So, but that's my opinion too, is just reading the words. That's the way we've always calculated childcare. So anyway, that's my opinion.
So in that findings down there, before you change it, Dustin, they're talking about churches and having separate rooms. How does that fit into the context here?
So I'll just bring it up for a second. So if I have a church and a daycare, there's not a requirement for an occupancy separation in a non-sprinkler building. But the issue is the determining fire area when the sprinkler requirements are kicked in. And since there's no occupancy separation, I then have to go with the exterior bounded walls for the E, which I would then be including the occupant load of my church into my E, which then would require the sprinklers. Since I don't have a fire barrier separating it for determining fire areas.
Okay.
And then on that one, especially with churches, because I've heard the argument that if the child is there for learning purposes such as Sunday school, there is no requirement, and you can have the same amount of kids, but as soon as you make it a child care, all of a sudden it's dangerous, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
I've heard that argument too,
well, that's what that's how the
yeah,
code separates it out. It
yeah,
allows if it's part of the religious
yep,
organization, then yeah, you can have
yeah,
it. But when it's not, then no.
yeah. So I understand that part of it too. I just I still, I guess, the way I do it was, I would look at the whole building if there's no area of separation. Like you said, in a strip mall, because I think that's where we're looking at, isn't it? Big, where a lot
But
of these are going, and
and
that's
then
totally
and
different than
that's
a church.
yeah, and that's different because of there is a mixed occupancy or separation required between like an M and an E. There already is a requirement for that, but um, I don't know. I'll let somebody else talk.
Angela?
So what is the threshold for an E that triggers sprinklers, the occupant load?
If you want to pull up our wonderful 5150, since we're doing it special here in Seattle. I'm sorry, in the state, not Seattle.
Because I'm just looking at, so even for residential, for single family, for in-home childcare, if you go over 13, the house has to be sprinklered.
For E occupancies where the fire has occupant load 51 or more, calculated in accordance with table 1004.5, which has the 35 net threshold, and then they have the exceptions. Number 3, fire areas containing daycare and preschool facilities with an occupant load of 100 or less when they do have a direct exit out. So right now, if I have a daycare, it's 51 or more, unless I meet that exception.
So
and that is much different than the national code, where I believe we're at 300 occupant load and 12,000 square feet. So we're much more restrictive here.
So reading that exception, it could be read that if you have a fire area, no matter how large, if any portion of it is a child care, then you meet those, right? I guess that's what it is saying. So, because it's becoming more restrictive than the base code is what that was.
Yeah, so he's got the base code language up.
Okay, and we added a whole bunch of, okay, so. Okay, so yeah, so no matter how big, so if you have a strip mall with no separation and one portion of it is
Any,
daycare or preschool facility of any type, then if you go over 100, you have to be sprinklered. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it kind of sounds like that's where the change would need to be made if you wanted it to be made.
well, then there's also
But-
the 907 provisions of, we also have I4
right. You're right.
provisions
Okay.
for under 2.5. So we'd have to change it there too. That's why I thought it was more than just an interpretation. I really thought that the tags or somebody should work on rulemaking for Group E and I4 and look at either 903 and 907 to come up with some language.
Yeah.
Or maybe even in Chapter 5 in the building code, regarding fire areas, and or the beginning of 901 for fire areas and have an exception. If that was the intent, and that's what the legislature thought. So I'm
Is
just
that-
basically asking for another set of eyes on this.
So this is, I mean, so this, the, the interpretation or the reason statement that is on the legislative page is basically singling out, they weren't targeting strip malls. They're doing this for churches. Is where their
Well, they say,
intent.
it says are one type of building. They're not, they just
Right.
don't just called out churches, but they just say are one type of building that often have rooms designated for. Yep.
Right.
But there's also a lot of businesses that if they're providing childcare also in their businesses,
Right. I I can see that that may have been the intent. I still don't see that that's what it says. But again, I'll leave it up to others also. And again, I mean, you're seeing it in the field, obviously. I don't know that we have yet, but
Go ahead, Katie.
Yeah, so Ken, was it a church where this came up?
nope,
No. Okay. Was it a strip mall?
nope.
Okay. I guess, I mean, they're really clear in the legislative intent that it's especially churches. And in the
So can we just go along with that though? Let's just say it was a church and you're
yeah,
determining occupant load, then you're not going to use 903 fire area.
right.
And you're just gonna say, nope, I'm only gonna, the fire area, the requirement for a fire barrier to separate out a fire area is not required based on this section. Because that
Right.
was the intent.
Right. I mean, I was pointing to this, it says that, these are buildings that are designed for educational purposes. Where does it say that? In the news section. And so is there any, I mean, it does seem like this is geared towards specific types of buildings more than, I mean, I don't know, they're both general and oddly specific. It's here if you go to this link, Dustin, in the
This one?
findings. Yeah, yeah, that one. I guess are we then going into a conversation about whether this is an emergency, or are we going into a conversation about whether or not this is an issue? Because it feels like it's an issue.
Well, maybe I'll address that first and then call on Angela here. I think I see, Dustin, what you're saying now, that we don't have a pathway for off cycle because we're outside of those new windows of 12 months and 18 months, right? Those are really restrictive on being able to do anything like this. Is that correct? And then that's why we'd have to establish emergency basis to align with new law, because we weren't specifically told to do this by the legislature. The law just changed. That doesn't
Well,
qualify as being directed.
I would maybe point to this section here if, the issue that's being painted, can be resolved with rulemaking. We can undertake emergency rulemaking because it's necessary to make the law consistent with our building code, or vice versa, our building code consistent with the law. I think we have that option available to us. It's just we are typically pigeonholing ourselves in the C1A category for rulemaking.
We just have to recognize there's two definitions of emergency. One is for health, safety, and welfare. One is for consistency.
I think that Dirk would probably agree with that characterization.
Okay, that was your first question, right, Katie?
Yeah.
And the second question is, does the council find
well, so it was kind of actually predicated on us pigeonholing ourselves into the preservation of public health, safety, or general welfare. So if this is about consistency with this new law, then it does feel like that would be maybe an appropriate, like that section, it would apply under that section. So we wouldn't have to make a finding that it's an emergency for that, for A. We'd have to find it because it's consistent, to make it consistent with the rule.
Sounds like we still need the 2/3 vote to establish the basis that we need to do this for consistency. Is that correct?
I definitely need to run that by Dirk. I'm not sure that I agree with it on my reading, but it would also be safe to rely on that to just cover the bases.
Okay. Angela, go ahead, please.
So, sorry, I just, a couple of things like that Ken is saying, I just want a little more clarification from him, because you're talking about this exempting them from fire barriers or separations. And I'm just curious, are you saying that if an E goes in next to a B or an M in a strip mall, that you're saying that this would exempt them from their required occupancy separations?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that I think that Chapter 5 would still apply,
Okay.
but when it comes to fire areas, I think the fire areas is my question for Chapter 9.
Okay, but so you're saying though, still, if this goes into a strip mall, an E, next to Lululemon and, something else or whatever, they would still need a 1 hour they would need a 2 hour separation if that building is not currently separated and it's in a separated use building.
But could I also put it in unseparated too?
If it's sprinklered, or if it meets the building, because see, that's where you could put it in, but then you're choosing to have a single fire area. So yeah, okay, so you're just saying that if they choose to do a non-separated use, then should they still be required to sprinkler based on their E occupancy and the entire structure being included in that 100?
in the
It
fire
triggers.
area, yeah, in
Right.
the fire area, yeah. That's the confusion that we're having is
Okay, so
yeah.
yeah.
And believe me, if it makes it easier, I don't want to develop the code language and bring it in. And the reason is it looks like if I do it, it looks like it's Seattle's code language that we're trying to bring in. And that's why I would really prefer, a tag or something to get together and work on proposed language to get it in. But if this group really wants to see proposed WAC language, I will develop it and put it in the appropriate sections. And it's going to be two different ways. One's going to be to allow it without a separation, and it will be give you two choices, one to allow it with, because I don't want to pick sides here. I just want to get clarity.
Correct me, so I guess Dustin, if this is gonna go forward to the council to consider as whether it's an emergency or not like that, don't we need to see some language, or do we make the determination prior to seeing anything?
Well, I think that what I have planned out for this one is to be introduced at the council meeting next week. No
Mhm.
council action will occur at that time, and I don't know if Ken, if you could, if we decide that we want you to develop that WAC language, if that would be available at that time. But I would anticipate that if we're continuing down the road after that, that the November 7th BFRW meeting could likely benefit from some WAC drafts. And then the November council meeting is where we would make that determination. So we've got some time before the council needs to take action on it for a language to be developed, if that's what we're asking from Ken.
Well, let's before we jump to that, I understand thank you, Ken, for expressing your concern about writing yourself. If I understand 1927-032, the petition does not have to include the language to my reading. It has to provide a concise statement of why there's a finding that an emergency basis exists. So first of all, we'd introduce it we can't take action anyway. We'd have to introduce it next Friday, with the concise statement that an emergency base exists, just talk about it, introduce it, and then that would be the action the following month, within 30 days or whatever the requirement is. And then the council, if they found emergency bases exist because of consistency, would direct it to something, right? Probably to the BFRW for work. Is that correct?
Correct.
So that's the point we would need to see language, right?
I mean, at the latest, yes, but I mean, if we could, I do feel the majority of the council probably likes to see the language as they're talking about it to kind of just feel it out. But it's not a requirement for them to make that emergency determination.
So is someone suggesting that we want to have some language to better introduce this topic to the council, so we don't have this conversation at the full council level again?
I think
Or
it
that's
would
fine.
make it more clear.
Yeah,
I think
okay.
I think having an idea of what is being proposed where would make it more clear as to where the problem exists, I guess.
And I think the way Ken, you framed it to say, hey, here's two options, I think that does help people wrap their head around it.
All right, and then I'm also going to reach out to some of the proponents of the legislation and ask them to attend. So maybe they can also discuss, the issues of what the intent of the legislation was and the issues that they're coming with. And maybe that would be helpful too for the decision-making process.
I'm pulling it up right now. So it's senators. It's on the Senate side. Okay.
Krishnadasan, Nobles, Slatter, and Wellman.
Okay. Okay. Well, we could also try to reach out.
Yeah, it would be helpful if you guys, as the Building Code Council members, would reach out to. I'm just a small little fire guy in Seattle. Have no political pull whatsoever.
Well, I think we all know your weight here, Ken, so thank you.
Yeah, it's getting greater every single day that I'm not exercising as much.
Okay, is everyone on board with that? Anyone have opposition to that strategy that we'd introduce it next week? And then also reach out for legislative intent as the council.
And just a question, does that, so that means that we're not gonna ask for specific language, or we are?
I think I talked myself back into, if we, to Angela's point, if we had a you know, two options to help better frame this for the council, that would be.
I tend to agree, and I mean, I looked and it looks like our requirements are sort of up to us a little bit, but traditionally we're looking over language, so.
But it's, to Dustin's point, it's not required.
Right.
We
But
can introduce it just as talk about consistency and the law, yeah.
Yeah. Cool, thanks. I'm-
Dustin, I'm sorry, Dustin, you have a drop dead date that you would need the language given to you so you'd have it ready for
So
next Friday?
ideally, I'd get it sometime early in the week. But we can get, if my drop dead would be like early Thursday morning.
Okay, well, I'm gonna try to work on it now. I'm gonna block out part of my day to work on it now, and then I really want to run it by Micah if I could too, before it gets to you. So if I
Okay.
don't have that opportunity, otherwise it'll probably get to you by Monday.
Okay. Thank you, Ken,
Thanks,
for
everybody.
walking us through that. Okay, if there's nothing else on that topic, I think that brings us to our end of our agenda, correct?
Correct. Let me
Do we
minimize stuff.
have any other business?
I do not.
Go ahead, Patrick. It looks like your mic's off or on, but as Patrick's pulling that up, anything else?
Yeah, I would give him some time to be able to log off and log back on again, just in case.
Yeah, we're not in a, we'll do that. We're patient.
All right, can you hear me at least?
Yes, sir.
And now we can.
Okay, you're just not gonna be able to see me, so I know you'll all be very disappointed in that. So I have an issue that I think would be easiest to bring it to the committee first, and I don't think it necessarily, I'm not asking for a resolution immediately. I just wanted to highlight this for you regarding EV charging, since the committee's worked very hard on this. So to kind of give you context, the RCW requiring the State Building Code Council to adopt EV charging requirements is tied to Washington's zero emission vehicle program, which I think everybody knows. But Washington's program is merely an adoption by reference of California's zero emission vehicle program. And California had to receive a waiver from the federal government. I believe it was in regards to EPCA, in order to run their program, which they had received under the prior administration. But recently, the federal government has revoked that waiver, which could affect states' ability to enforce current programs. There is current litigation over this, but my understanding is the waiver has not been stayed. So as of right now, technically the waiver would be, the action to revoke the waiver would be in effect, thus removing states' ability to be able to enforce these programs. So what that means is it could increase sort of legal risk for local jurisdictions that enforce the EV charging infrastructure requirements under the current code or the 2024 code, if this issue is still up when it goes into implementation. And if somebody that's being enforced on somebody and they don't like that, they could challenge that in court, saying that they don't have the authority to adopt that. Could have a big conversation about whether or not that's likely to occur, but I at least wanted to make the council and the committee aware of that, so you could potentially, talk with Dirk to see what the legal risk is for the code, whether or not you think anything needs to be done in regards to that. You might be able to have a broader conversation with the AG's office. I think they're part of the litigation, so they might, hopefully they'll know more about how that's going to work out. I want to make it very clear, I support the reforms that that the committee and the council have moved forward in the rulemaking and will hopefully be adopted for the 2024 cycle. But I just wanted to make you aware that that is going on, and it could affect the EV charging infrastructure enforcement. So just to bring that before you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. Yeah, I personally have to do some homework to better understand where the references to the federal authority, but that's interesting topic. Okay.
Yeah,
So-
Patrick, thank you for the notice. Do you know the case number or any of the case name?
I don't know the
Okay,
case
that's
number
okay.
off the top of my head. But if you talk with Derek in the state, I imagine they probably hopefully know more than I do. So I just wanted to make you aware of that.
No, appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Patrick. Okay. If there's nothing else, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.